Right, this thing about marrying without a wali. Okay, wali. Where's wali? Where's wali, people? Where's wali? We gotta play that game. So a wali is a guardian, especially when it's to do with the girl. Okay, so a father or somebody, it could be an uncle or it could be the grandfather, but it's a male guardian. Now, the question is, so first of all, let me tell you the rulings that the madhabs have, the scholars, how they've interpreted this, and then what does this whole discourse base itself on? And then let's take a look at some of those hadith. On a separate note, actually, before we begin that, I'll just highlight, this is actually a very fascinating book. It's an extraction of all the generally the problematic narrations of Imam Zuhri. Somebody had asked me about Imam Zuhri as a narrator of hadith that Darqutni has kind of extracted. Imam Darqutni. Why Darqutni? Because he has a major book called his Ilal, which is in about 10 volumes. I do have it right over there, people. Right over there. Let me over there. Right over there, people. So, and it's a major work. He's also the same scholar that critiqued Sahih al-Bukhari. He was a legend in his time for hadith criticism and hadith sciences, really. So now this particular work has just focused on Imam Zuhri's narrations. Why? Because so much come to us from him. All right, now, so as an example, I mean, this is not what I'm going to be looking at, but as an example, you will find, let's say there's a section in here. I mean, there's several sections, but one, let's say this, those ahadith which الأحاديث المعلّى بالاختلاف في إبدال الإسناد كاملا فوق الزهري. So those which the chain is completely changed when it comes to after Zuhri, after Imam Zuhri. So, for example, there's a famous hadith: إذا سمع أحدكم المؤذن يتشهد فليقل مثل قولي. This is from Abu Huraira, that if any of you hears the mu'adhin, the person saying the adhan, then let him saying ashhadu an la ilaha, then let him repeat like what he's hearing. Now, Zuhri transmits this, farawahu, this is transmitted by Abdul Rahman ibn Ishaq from Zuhri, who transmits it from Sa'id ibn Musayyib from Abu Huraira. But yet in another narration, it's transmitted from Zuhri, from Ata ibn Yazid, from Abu Sa'id al-Khudri. And Darqutni mentions that is the correct one. وَهُوَ الصَّحِيح. Okay. Now, right, and that is, I believe, transmitted by Imam Malik, if I'm correct as well. The correct one. So, but the point being, nevertheless, is that there was a full chain which was transmitted incorrectly. So after Imam Zuhri, the chain, which is a Sahih chain, from Sa'id ibn Musayyib, who is a Don, from Abu Huraira, but this people, somebody has got it wrong. It wasn't even from these people. It was from Zuhri, you had in this chain, from Ata ibn Yazid, from Abu Sa'id al-Khudri. Okay, so that's, and it's got several examples. I just quoted that as an example. What was this one I've got here? This is just to show why, because this is interesting. That look, there's another hadith, and this is a popular one. You guys might have heard of this. لا حسد إلا في اثنتين. That رجل آتاه الله مالا. That there is no jealousy except in two things. You guys have probably heard of this hadith. It's very popular. That jealousy is only permitted in two things. One is in wealth that a person spends in the name of God, and one, it mentions about knowledge, or in some versions about somebody who recites the Quran. Now this is transmitted generally from, once again with the famous chain, from Zuhri, from Sa'id ibn Musayyib, from Abu Huraira. But the correct version is that's actually a wrong chain. Yet that's how it's transmitted. the correct chain, as Darqutni mentions, is from Zuhri, from Salim, from his father Ibn Umar. Okay. And then he goes through the whole discussion here to kind of show where this hadith in all these different books, where it appears, and why. But nevertheless, I just thought I'll mention that this is a fascinating book. It comes in 4 volumes. I did buy it earlier on this year. But I am finding it quite fascinating, I must say. So it's called Marwiyatul Imam Zuhri al-Mu'alla. So the narrations of Imam Zuhri that are problematized. And Illa, I have translated, people. I have. Banda na cheese. You know, in the like subcontinent culture, when they start kind of saying, when they want to kind of be humble, they start overdoing it. And they start like saying, you know, like Al-Haqir, Al-Abdul Haqir, the despised one. Ahqar, the most despised, has done. You know, like when they're trying to say, I've done it, they will say, oh, this, instead of saying this humble servant or this humble, they'll say the most despised, the most wretched, the most crippled. Right, so anyway, so I've translated the term, this thing of Ilalul Hadith, which is a science, as hadith or textual pathology, people. So because an illa is a kind of like a disease or a kind of, that's what it is, like an illness. Okay, so Ilalul Hadith is like hadith or textual pathology, or narratorial pathology, people. And these ilal are pathogens, okay? Narratorial pathogens. Wow, sounds so narratorial. Right, so let me put that there. So what I'm going to do is I'll explain what this whole discussion is on a woman that is looking to get married. Does she need her guardians present, or her guardian, wali? And then we'll look at what this is based on and the problems there. So the madhabs, the schools within Sunni Islam, this is how they view this issue. So the Hanafi madhab is very clear that a woman does not need, and this is Imam Abu Hanifa, by the way. Imam Abu Hanifa, I should be more precise, because his 2 fellow companions kind of betrayed him on this one. Right, if I can use the term betrayal. But Imam Abu Hanifa, who was the true don and legend, unlike, I mean, his 2 companions, but Imam Abu Hanifa says that a woman does not need a wali. Okay, he's very clear on this point. This is Imam Abu Hanifa, and other subsequent scholars like Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi support his view and argue in defense of it. Okay, in his book Sharh Ma'ani al-Athar, amongst other works as well. Then you have the madhabs like the Shafi'i madhab and the Hanbali madhab. They are very clear, and like the Salafis today, the Wahhabis, and they are very clear that a woman's nikah without a wali, without a guardian present, is batil. Batil, people. Batil. It's invalid. Not even da'if. Batil. Batil, people. It's batil. So you got on one side, you've got Imam Abu Hanifa. The other side, you've got people like Imam Shafi'i. You've got the Hanbali madhab. Right, now the Maliki madhab is a bit, I feel, unclear on this. In its apparent reading, it reads that it appears, or it's presented, let me put it like this. This is a better way of putting it. It's presented with this camp in saying that, oh, Imam Malik also said that a woman cannot marry without her wali. Yet, you see, Right? So, yet in the Mudawwana, and this is quoting from the Mudawwana as well, this is Al-Dhaban Madhabi Malik. This was written by Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, the legend, also called Young Malik. In defense, it's called in defense of the Maliki Madhab, or the Madhab of Malik. Now, you see, you will find a quote from Imam Malik where he's asked, so he's asked that, what do you say about the opinion of Malik fil mar'a tuwakkilu rajulan ghayra waliyiha ala aqdi nikahiha. Anyway, speaking about what do you say about this, a woman who doesn't get a wali, she gets another man to say, can you just read my nikah? Or about the slave woman who does this, or so on. Now, and this is the quote, you see, and this is in the Mudawwana as well. وَأَنَّ الْمَرْأَةَ الدَّنِيئَةَ أو الْفَقِيرَةَ, that a poor woman, or a woman that is of low status. Now, this is interesting. I'll come back to this point. الدَّنِيئَةَ, the one who is of low status. إِذَا تَزَوَّجَتْ بِغَيْرِ وَلِيٍّ فَنِكَاحُهُمَا جَمِيعًا جَائِزٌ. What do you have to say about that? Okay, so he then goes on to say that, look, Ibn Abi Zayd doesn't support that, by the way, but that's in the Mudawwana of Imam Malik, by Ibn al-Qasim, hence he's addressing it here. And he goes on to say that, you know, فَفَرَّقَ بَيْنَ الْغَنِيَّةِ وَالْفَقِيرَ فِي الْحُكْمِ بِلَا دَلِيلٍ مِنْ كِتَابٍ وَلَا سُنَّةٍ وَلَا إِجْمَاعٍ. He says that, you know, this distinction was made between the rich woman and the poor woman without any evidence from the Quran or Sunnah and so on. And then he kind of goes on to say, look, that it's sometimes confusing. It appears to be that Imam Malik sometimes seems to be saying this, sometimes seems to be saying that, and so on. Nevertheless, let's get back to the point. You see, Imam Malik seems to make a distinction. Now, this distinction is important because on one hand, he seems to be in line with these, like the Shafi'is and these people saying that no, a woman cannot get married without a wali. But then he says, when he's asked about a woman who, let's say, is of lowly status. Now, by the way, some people have interpreted, as on a tangent, I want to mention this here. Some people have wrongly interpreted that. And I will highlight that they've said things like in the Sharh al-Kabir, and you'll find a few books, that they wrongly, even Sidi Ahmad Zarruq and other people, the Suqi and all these people, some of them have said, who can a woman of low status be who? And some of them have said things like, oh, converts, or al-Musalmaniya, or they've said who doesn't have a lineage or wealth, or who isn't beautiful, or they've said a black woman. Now, I just want to clarify and condemn that. That statement is wrong, right? That was never said ever. That was not a statement of Imam Malik. This was hundreds of years after Imam Malik, right? Imam Malik in his Mudawwana just says the word Dani'a, which is somebody of lowly status. He says that she doesn't need a wali. Now, people like Sidi Ahmad Zarruq or these other people, they come like you're talking, and some of them between 600 years after Imam Malik to whether it's going to be 800 to 1,000 years after Imam Malik. Some of these people commenting on this, writing these things, that is racist. It is wrong. Okay, so whatever is wrong, we condemn it. And that was not said by Imam Malik. Just to be very clear, he did say ad-dani'a. He uses the word dani'a, which means lowly status. Now, these people later on in their times are saying who has lowly status. Oh, a Musalmaniya, a convert has lowly status, or this has lowly status. That's their interpretation being superimposed. But now let's come back to, because the reason I'm saying that is it's important. You see, this just shows that somebody, like people said to me, oh, like, why do you condemn this hadith as problematic, the one of the age of Aisha being 6, when the scholars in the past didn't have a problem with it? But we have to understand that a lot of these scholars in the past that they're looking at from the medieval age, they had many outlooks on life which we would condemn. And many of them did have racist outlooks on life as well. So we would condemn that as well. So, so just to be clear that even these people who criticize me for saying that, look, you are being critical of this hadith, but Ibn Hajar and all these people who came afterwards accept this hadith of the age of Aisha being 6, and you're saying it's not acceptable. But most of those scholars, if you look in their works, they will also have racist tendencies, and they will see it as absolutely normal. Like, they won't see that as they're even discriminating. They will just take it as a given. Like, yeah, of course black people are down there. Now, they'll see that as just, like, I'm not being racist, that's just a fact. They will think of it as a fact. So, just because scholars have said it doesn't make it correct. Okay. So, it's not from Allah, it's not from His Messenger, it's not from the Quran or Sunnah, and it's not even, in that case, from the Salaf. This is from scholars of the medieval age. Right, so just putting that aside, coming back to this point, the reason Imam Malik distinguishes this, it's important. Why? Because it shows us why the wali was important in their eyes. The guardian was important because it was all to do with status in society. It wasn't actually something to do with a divine commandment from God. It was more about not breaching the peace, not having kind of social discord or disunity, or to kind of maintain a social cohesion. So in their society, they felt if a woman was to get married like this, it's going to cause problems. So they said it was necessary. Now, that's not so clear in like the other people's views, but in Imam Malik's view, when he made this distinction in saying, well, if a woman didn't really have that kind of a status, it's no big deal. It showed so it's not actually from Allah or His Messenger. Because if it was, then it would apply to everybody regardless. That's an important point, people. And by the way, this is what you find... I can't actually see any comments, by the way. Let me just see. Oh, right. So that might be because... Right, I don't know what no, but I didn't actually do anything, so I don't know how that happened. So, nevertheless, coming back to this point, right, so I can't see, for some reason I can just see who's watching, but I can't see the comments, and it's confusing. Let me just press this, see what does that do. No. Anyway, right, let's get back to this point. Now, I want to take a look at a hadith. Now, most people will tell you that there are several ahadith to say that a woman cannot marry without her guardian. La nikaha illa bi wali. This is one book, for example, that is dedicated to this entire topic. I mean, amongst several others, this particular one, Tahqiq al-Jali, li hadith la nikaha illa bi wali. Now, what's interesting is this hadith of there is no nikah except with a wali is transmitted from several companions, although all of these chains are problematic, and I will come to that point in just a moment. But before I do, I want to highlight some of the discrepancies, some of the issues that people have been transmitting for centuries on end. Right now, for example, this hadith is transmitted for example by Al-Hakim in his Mustadrak. Abu Abdullah Al-Hakim An-Nisapuri, in his Mustadrak, he brings the hadith La nikaha illa bi wali, and then he says that فَقَدْ أَخْرَجَهُ مِنْ حَدِيثِ عائشة وَأَبِي مُوسَى الْأَشْعَرِي. So these two people, Aisha and Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. And you'll realize that these are the only real chains in this whole chapter. From Aisha radiallahu anha and from Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. And they have problems, but I'll come to that in a moment. But then he says, وَفِي الْبَابِ. And in this chapter we have hadith from, this is Al-Hakim writing, from Ali radiallahu an, from Abdullah ibn Abbas, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, Abdullah ibn Umar, Abu Dhar al-Ghaffari, Miqdad ibn al-Aswad, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Jabir ibn Abdullah, Abu Huraira, Imran ibn Hussein, Abdullah ibn Amr, Miswar ibn Makhrama, Anas ibn Malik. And then, so that's, I've counted out 13, says, وَأَكْثَرُهَا صَحِيحًا. Okay. Chalo, a bit of a blag there, أَكْثَرُهَا صَحِيحًا. No problem, no problem. But, so he brings 13 people. Now, these riwayat come from, there's other narrations coming. People will present narrations from Umar ibn al-Khattab and other people. There's issues with a lot of these, but the point that I'm trying to get to, Hafidh ibn Hajar, it is stated, so people start transmitting from Hafidh ibn Hajar al-Asqalani when he's commenting on this in his notes, in his Amali, upon the Mustadrak of al-Hakim. So people transmit, who come after Ibn Hajar, transmit his words where he says, وَفِي الْبَابِ عَنْ عَلِيِّ ibn Abi Talib وَابْنَ عَبَّاسِ ثُمَّ سَرَدَ تَمَامَ 30 صَحَابِيًا, that he transmits 30 companions, 30, 30. That's, it says the word 30 صَحَابِيًا. Now there's a big problem here because that is not true. Okay, now everybody starts to, this thing, what Ibn Hajar wrote, everybody does they kind of copy and paste what he said here. That Al-Hakim then goes on to mention 30. What he meant to say was 13. 13, but he said 30. Now you'll see people like Shawkani transmit that statement from him, San'ani transmits it from him. You'll see Kattani in his Nazm al-Mutanathir. You see, Kattani writes a book about mutawatir hadith that have been transmitted by so many people. He transmits this statement of Ibn Hajar, 30 companions. Zayla'i, and you'll get other people transmitting this. Now the truth is that was actually a mistake, because there are not 30 people that have actually kind of said that. Okay, so it's 13. Right, okay, now the problem with all of these chains that have come, you'll find that all of these other companions that they quote, whether it's going to be from Abu Huraira, whether it's going to be from Umar ibn Khattab, all of them are massively problematic, okay, massively. You'll find, first of all, a lot of them are not even hadith, they're just statements like, so for example, somebody said to Umar, like, get up and marry her off to so-and-so. So they're using that as a dalil as well. That why did they say to Umar, why didn't they just do it themselves? But that's not a decisive, that could have just been by choice. They could have just said, do this. It didn't mean that. So it's not actually clear statements, just to make that clear, okay? A lot of these are like that. A lot of them are mawquf, so they're not actually from the Prophet. They're just companions saying their opinions. However, the two narrations that can stand some weight, the two that come down, are from Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, which is transmitted from his son Abu Burda. Now this is the hadith that Tirmidhi brings, and he kind of like goes on and supports, and he does highlight the ikhtilaf in it. The issue with this hadith first of all, and the other one is to do with Aisha. So these two chains we're going to look at just quite briefly, I mean not too much depth, is that this hadith of Abu Musa al-Ash'ari is transmitted, right? You've got this through certain chains. One is by Abu Ishaq, and it's a popular narration. Um, this the problem with this chain is many people who are transmitting this hadith, like legends who are greater than Abu Ishaq, like Shu'bah, Sufyan al-Thawri, they say that this hadith does not actually go to Abu Musa. It's his son Abu Burda saying it directly from the Prophet, which makes this chain broken. Okay, which means that you can't actually rely on it. Okay. This is one of the key issues that Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi relies on when he's refuting this whole chapter. Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi says that, look, listen, you guys are presenting these ahadith, and the truth is that these hadith from Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, major Hufad, Amir al-Mu'mineen, legends of hadith who transmit this same hadith, do not even mention him in the chain. It stops with his son Abu Burda, and he does not take from the Prophet. So this chain is incomplete. Okay, so that is one of the key problems you have straight away with that chain. And I know people will say that some people have accepted it. Of course they have. But what I'm trying to show, and I know here, you see, like, they're going to show Bukhari's comment. Now, Bukhari's comment, when he was discussing this with most likely Tirmidhi, who transmits it, he says that when he was asked about this hadith from Israel, from Abi Ishaq, from Abu Burda, from his father, La nikah illa bi wali, he said, look, I know it's got some extra in it, but we'll accept it, even though Shu'bah and Thawri say it was not a complete chain. But he says, look, like, it's okay, we can still go with it. That's fine, that's his choice. I'm not saying that. But the truth is that Shu'bah is called Amir al-Mu'mineen fil Hadith. He said this chain was not connected. Sufyan al-Thawri, who's once again greater than Abu Ishaq and these people, is saying that this chain is not connected. So you have, okay, now this other chain that we have, Darqutni brings this in when critiquing Zuhri's hadith. Why? Because he says, Darqutni was asked about the hadith of Ibn Musayyib from Abu Huraira, La tunkahul mar'a illa bi wali, that a woman is not married except with her guardian present. He says this chain from Zuhri, from Sa'id ibn Musayyib, from Abu Huraira is wrong. It ought to be that Zuhri from Urwa, from Aisha. Okay, this is how the chain ought to be. Now, what's interesting, people, this is an interesting point, that he goes on to bring several other, Darqutni goes on to bring several chains to support this, and he shows that who has transmitted this hadith. So he'll go on and say, look, from Sa'id ibn Musayyib, from Abu Huraira, this is transmitted by Tabarani. Who transmits it? Umar ibn Qais. Who else transmits it? Sulaiman ibn Arqam. So Umar ibn Qais, Sulaiman ibn Arqam. And then he mentions that there is an extra. Now this is an important point. There is an extra, an adage, an addition in that hadith that says, La nikaha illa bi wali. A woman cannot get married except with a wali. Wa shahidai adl, and 2 witnesses. The interesting thing, people, this hadith of 2 witnesses, right, only is brought by this chain. That you'll see that this thing of Ibn Hibban mentions that that this لا يصح في ذكر شاهدين غير هذا الخبر. Okay, so you'll see this thing of that there must be 2 witnesses present is only valid in one single chain at most, which is an interesting point, since it's, accepted by almost everybody, and it's based on a very weak kind of chain. I find that quite fascinating, and that's why the Maliki madhab said that witnesses are not necessary for a nikah to take place, simply an announcement is made. Because it's not proven from the Prophet anywhere that he said witnesses were present. That this hadith that we have of Sulaiman ibn Arqam, that la nikah illa bi wali, has tafarrud in it. Now, just highlighting some points here, although this hadith is transmitted in many books of La Nikah illa bi wali from Aisha, coming that she mentioned, this Khatib al-Baghdadi brings it, Bayhaqi, Humaydi, Ibn Abi Shayba, Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Hibban. There's up to, in fact, 21 people transmitting it, all of them going through Zuhri. Going through Zuhri. This is important. Ibn Jurayj is the one who is taking it before him. Now, Ibn Jurayj from Sulaiman ibn Musa from Ibn Shihab. Now, what's interesting, this is a point I want you to focus on. Imam Ahmad brings in his Musnad that from Ismail ibn Ulayya, that from Ibn Jurayj, who says that Sulaiman ibn Musa told us this from Zuhri. Ibn Jurayj says, then I met Zuhri. Now, this is an important point because the Hanafiya use this as a dalil, and those people who say a wali is not necessary. Because the first, remember I said this whole thing is based on two hadith. One of Abu Musa, which many scholars like Shu'bah, Sufyan al-Thawri said was not a connected chain. The other on Aisha, from Urwa from Aisha. Now the interesting thing is that Zuhri, who transmits this, and from him Sulaiman ibn Musa, Ibn Jurayj says that he takes this hadith from them. He says, I met Zuhri, which he does meet him. He says, I asked him about this hadith. فَسَأَلْتُهُ عَنْ هَذَا الْحَدِيثِ فَلَمْ يَعْرِفْهُ. He himself didn't know it. Zuhri himself, who is the transmitter of this hadith, so many people are transmitting it from him. Ibn Jurayj says, when I asked him about this hadith, lam ya'rifu, he himself didn't know it. This was one of the key reasons that many scholars abandoned this hadith and narration from of Aisha through Zuhri, because they said that this was the only strongest chain that they had, and this was the only chain that is coming through Ibn Jurayj from Zuhri that mentioned two witnesses is also necessary. And this is the chain regarding which Ibn Hibban said that لا يصح في ذكر الشاهدين غير هذا الخبر. This was the only one that we had sound where it mentioned two witnesses. But Ibn Jurayj himself is saying, although Sulaiman ibn Musa told me that Zuhri said this from Urwa from Aisha, but when I met Zuhri, he himself did not know this narration. And Zuhri himself is one of the scholars that gives the fatwa that a woman can get married without a wali. So you can see, people, that this was the key. Now, there was a lot of kalam, like the names I mentioned before, by the way, the people that transmit this, some of the people earlier on from the other chain, Umar ibn Qais, the unacceptable Sulaiman ibn Arqam is considered matruk al-hadith, rejected, da'if. This one of even Zuhri from Urwa from Aisha, Sulaiman ibn Musa, right? Even Nasa'i said about him, he's unacceptable, he's not strong in hadith. He said his hadith are problematic. Abu Hatim said في حديثي وفي حديثه بعض الاضطراب, his hadith contradict themselves at times. Ibn Adi mentioned that he mentions hadith which nobody else transmits at time. So there were issues with this nevertheless. But my point being, I want to just put that down for now. My point being that this whole chapter, now if you look at this, we were going from this thing of some people like Al-Kattani in his book Nazm al-Mutanathir is saying this is mutawatir. This hadith is so well distributed that it's certain knowledge. It's like knowing that China exists. This is how certain this knowledge is. But upon analysis and dissection, we come to find that, first of all, none of these chains can even stand any decent, rigorous kind of analysis apart from two, which was from Abu Musa al-Ash'ari and from Aisha. The problem with Abu Musa al-Ash'ari's chain is those who transmit it that were known as Amirul Mu'minina fil Hadith, like Shu'bah and Sufyan, they themselves say that this is not from Abu Musa, but his son Abu Burda is transmitting it as a broken chain from the Prophet. So with that chain drops, people. Then you have the other one of Aisha, and this chain of Aisha radiallahu an is the only one standing, and that comes through Urwa, through Ibn Shihab, from him Sulaiman ibn Musa, who Nasa'i says is unacceptable, who other people have problematized, coming through Ibn Jurayj, and then from up to 20 people transmitting it. But Ibn Jurayj himself saying, when I met Ibn Shihab and asked him, Ibn Shihab himself did not know this hadith. And his own fatwa was that this is permissible. So, with that, we can conclude that forget mutawatir. Forget mutawatir. This hadith is not even sahih. Okay? And other people may challenge that understanding. They may say, well, we want to accept it. Fine, accept it. But you can't critique those people who don't accept it, because they have a firm stance, a firm foundation to build their understanding on. So that was the hadithi discussion on why there is not a single, undisputed, categorical, conclusive hadith, sarih and sahih, right, without criticism, on that a woman must have a guardian to conduct her nikah. Okay, so based on that, people, it is not necessary for a woman to have, according to the Quran and Sunnah clearly. Right, now, that said, I would like to follow up now from so we've got that clear, that, from the clear sources we know that, okay, from the Quran and Sunnah, the Quran can be interpreted either side. So there's some verses which show that a woman can marry herself. So for example, when the verse about talaq, and it mentions that حَتَّى تَنْكِحَ زَوْجًا غَيْرًا, until she marries, تَنْكِحْ زَوْجًا غَيْرًا. So some verses imply this, some verses imply that, when you are marrying them off. So the Quran can be interpreted either way. It doesn't speak clearly on this matter. One thing we know for sure is that women were independent generally on several matters, and in some things it was a patriarchal society, unquestionably. Now there is a hadith that Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi brings that Aisha radiallahu anha marries her niece off, who is Abdurrahman's daughter. Her name was Hafsa, so her brother Abdurrahman was away on a journey. She marries her off. Abdurrahman comes back and is quite upset, actually, that how come, you didn't wait for me and you didn't ask me. And she says that if you want, I'll call it off. Like, I mean, we can, if we want, we can end it. And he says, no, like, don't be silly. Why would we do that? The interesting point is nobody says that it's invalid. So Aisha is clearly not a man marrying off her own niece here. So that is one of the main evidences. So from the Sunnah we find nothing conclusive. We find doubtful narrations either side. One thing we can understand is, so we can we've got the schools of law, the Hanafi school, or Imam Abu Hanifa, Zufar. You've got scholars like Sha'bi, Az-Zuhri. You've got Sufyan al-Thawri, and I would say Imam Malik as well, okay, in this camp, that don't believe that this is a necessary condition. And then you've got other scholars like Imam Shafi'i and Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Like I said, people may try to put Imam Malik in that camp, but when you look at his fatwa as I presented, it shows that he clearly understood this was more a social thing and not a divine matter from God. So now I would like to say, well, look, that all said, people need to take their social reality into consideration. I would advise that it is always important to have your guardians involved. Okay, I will advise that. It is always important to have them involved where it is, so long as it is actually possible. I think people shouldn't embark on just these kind of these very secret kind of marriages and things like this. I think these things most often lead to more problems than not. So that is my advice. I'm not advocating things like that. I am advocating that you do always have your family involved, because family it will give you some credence, it will give you some support, and having that completes the ceremony for you as far as it being meaningful, okay, counts. So that's what I would advise. The other thing is that, what if the parents do not allow the marriage? Then I would say, look, it still depends. If it's something totally stupid, like they're saying the only reason we're not allowing this relationship is because of something like caste, for example, which many people surprisingly still do, I would say things like that are ridiculous. And it's your choice, it's your life. Islamically, you are entitled to conduct a nikah. If they're not objecting to things like that, they're objecting to matters which are actually make sense. Like, wait a minute, how will this person even support you? How will you embark on this relationship? The person, he doesn't seem legitimate, or he's involved in crime, or he's involved in this. Then I think their concerns are 100% genuine and well placed. And, quite often you will find that matters will unfold as they advised, that things just mess up. So I would say, look, maybe take their advice if it's like that, because it's not a fairy tale. It's not just Bollywood, you're not just going to sing a few songs and that's life done for you. So I would say it is your call ultimately, it is your life, and you will have to live it. Islam kind of leaves things. It's not what God is saying, but I would say that there is some sense. I would always advise to have family involved, so long as it is actually possible. Okay. So cool, people. I think that kind of answers that mas'ala, which I think a lot of people have asked, that must a woman have a wali present? One thing we have seen, that there is not a single sarih hadith that can stand the test of criticism, that is uncriticized. Okay, so cool.